Starliner Media.
Starliner Media presents Music Night at the Majestic with your host, Michael Boswell.
All right, it's time once again for Music Night at the Majestic, and with us tonight, Dennis Diken of The Smithereens. Dennis, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Michael. I'm glad to be here.
Well, I hope you say that when all is said and done.
Well, if I don't, I won't say it. I'll spare your feelings. No, I'm sure.
Well, I appreciate that very much.
So far, so good.
Maybe we should just stop now then. Thanks for being here.
Pleasure.
I'll tell you what, as we often say in the show, every musician's journey starts somewhere. Where was that somewhere for you, Dennis?
Me personally, I was born in 1957, and I think I just dug right into music. I think I was exposed to it. This occurred to me in recent years. I think my first real exposure to popular music and rock and roll was from TV. My family watched the Ed Sullivan Show, but more importantly and more pointedly, I think, watching American Bandstand. TV was a bit of a babysitter for us boomers, as we're called. And so it was on every afternoon, and I watched it. And I couldn't help but be attracted to the rhythms and the music and the melodies of the records. They appealed to me in a big way. And my mom says, I don't remember this, but she said I was kind of banging around in the crib. I play drums. And I do remember I was 2.5 going on 3, for that Christmas of 1959, I asked for a toy guitar, but I did get a toy drum too. And I started picking up my Ticker toys and Lincoln Logs, if some of you remember those, and used them as my sticks and just started teaching myself to play. And then when the twist hit, I guess, was that 60? I'm not sure with Chubby Checker.
Yeah, it's 60, that's 62 with Twist Again, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay, because I think he had a number 1 with the twist 2 consecutive years in a row.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, when that hit, 60, 61, that really drew my attention as well and helped get me excited about music. And by 62 and 63, when I was 5 and 6, I really embraced what was on Top 40 radio. And I remember my earliest drum tracks that really excited me were records by the Four Seasons and Leslie Gore, and the Phil Spector productions by the Crystals and the Ronettes and Jan and Dean. And a lot of doo-wop was still on the radio back then, and all that captured my imagination and really sowed the seeds. And I just never looked back. I just kept on. And, when you're that young and you get passionate about something like music, it really sticks with you, and it really digs deep into your spirit. And it really, really did for me, I'm happy to say.
Tell me this, Dennis, was there a drummer or drummers in particular that you were fascinated with and had the biggest influence on you as you were starting out playing?
Well, at that time that I'm talking about now, of course, I didn't know who the drummers were. I didn't know that there were studio musicians playing on Four Seasons records or Leslie Gore. I later learned that, of course, Hal Blaine was the primary drummer. Hal Blaine and Earl Palmer were the guys that played on most of the Phil Spector productions. And once I learned who they were, boy, they became huge heroes of mine. The guy who played on many, many of the Four Seasons records was a fellow called Buddy Saltzman, who I became friends with later in his life. And he was a New York session guy who played on a lot of hit records, but didn't really. The New York group, as opposed to the Wrecking Crew in Los Angeles, didn't get as much attention. But those were the guys. And then, of course, once I found out that the drummer of the Beach Boys' name was Dennis, I flipped. I said, wow. Because they were my favorite group at the time. This is before the Beatles hit. Wow, the drummer of the Beach Boys is named Dennis. That really I felt a real affinity for him and them, but knowing that we shared a name, we had that namesake thing going on was a big deal. Loved Ringo, totally loves, to this day I listen to him for inspiration. And there's so many drummers, the Motown guys, Roger Hawkins with Muscle Shoals, the Swampers, um, Kenny Jones when he played with the Small Faces, Levon Helm, um, Al Jackson in Memphis, and Gene Chrisman, another Memphis drummer, um, Dino Danelli, just a god of rock drumming. Johnny Barbada with the Turtles, also kind of in the style of Dino, coming from a jazz thing and a real strong sense of showmanship. Um, I could talk for hours. Gary Chester, another New York drummer, Charlie Watts, Keith Moon. I mean, I'm sure I'll think of some as we further our discussion today. But those are a few that come to mind.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, for the sake of time, we'll flash forward to high school where you meet Jim.
Yeah.
How did you guys end up meeting and pursuing your musical path?
Well, it's a story I tell a lot, and it's a pretty cool story. I got my first drum kit in 1968, and there weren't a lot of musicians in grammar school. We had grammar school. We didn't have a junior high. We went straight from grammar school to high school. So I was really hungry to form a band. I really, really wanted to form a band when I was 11, and I got my first kit. Like I said, there weren't that many rock players in grammar school. And when I graduated 8th grade, I was looking forward to going to high school because there would be a whole new, larger student body and a bunch of kids that I never knew. And I was hopeful that I would find players, that would be cool and that I'd want to form a band with. It so happened the summer between 8th grade and freshman year, that was 1971, the kid who delivered newspapers to our house heard me playing drums in the basement. They had a band. They were looking for a drummer. So I did join my first band that summer between 8th grade and freshman year. It wasn't a really great band, but it was good experience, and played my first gig in front of people with them. Anyway, that band kind of broke up in short order, or I quit that band in short order. So anyway, going into high school, the first day of high school, freshman year in September of 71, my criteria was if I could find a guitarist who could play I Can't Explain by The Who, that would be a great starting point, just somebody that's not just into the top 40 of the day, but somebody that was a bit hipper and had something going on. So I always tell it this way: it's day one, period one, row one, seat one. There's this kid sitting there with kind of a beetly haircut. I said, well, this kid looks like he might be kind of hip. And he opens up his loose leaf notebook, and plastered inside are color pictures of The Who from Hit Parader magazine. I said, whoa, I didn't see that in Lincoln School and in grammar school. Nobody had pictures of The Who at all, So after class, I introduced myself and I said, hey, I see you have pictures of The Who, and by any chance, do you play guitar? He says, I do. And I said, well, I play drums, and, it'd be really great to get together and see if we can make something happen. And that week we did. We started playing together September of 1971. We were 14. And Mike Mazaris, our bass player, we both knew since grammar school, but he wasn't playing bass back then. I went to school with Mike. I grew up with him since 3rd grade. In the town of Carteret, New Jersey, where we lived, they had different school districts, and Jimmy lived just across the line from where ours was, so he went to a different grammar school. But he knew Mike because they went to the same church, so they knew each other peripherally. So as the high school years went by, Jimmy and I are practicing like crazy in his garage, playing all kinds of Who and Kinks and Beatles songs. And Mike hung out with us, but he thought, well, I'm hanging out with them. I might as well learn to play bass, and I could hang out with them and maybe play in a band with them. So that's how that nucleus was formed. And we couldn't find a lead singer that was into what we were doing until we met Pat, which was in 1978. We graduated high school in 75 and met Pat in 78. Actually met him through a musicians classified ad. And I played in a cover band with Pat for about 6 months before we came together to form the Smithereens. Pat had been starting to write originals, and he called me after that cover band broke up. He called me in to play on some demos, and I said, I know some guys that would be really good for this music, and that's really how it came together.
Yeah. Now you're the one that came up with the name for the band, correct?
Mm-hmm. That's right. Yeah.
Now, how did you come to decide that that's what you guys were going to go by?
It sounded like a name that should have existed for a rock and roll band in the 60s, But if there was one, we hadn't known about it. There was a glee club, an all-female glee club from Smith College in New England, and they were called the Smithereens. I think they still exist, the name, but we had their blessing. Matter of fact, they sent us some of their recordings. But yeah, it was a word we heard in various strains of pop culture. Most notably, I guess, Yosemite Sam in the Warner Brothers cartoons. I'll blow you varmints to smithereens. And we later learned it's a Gaelic word, and it means tiny fragments, of which the four of us none are. But it just sounded like a good rock and roll band name, and people really reacted to it and still think it's pretty cool. So it goes.
Now, it was about 2 years later, after forming, you guys did the Girls About Town EP, correct?
No, actually, it was the first year we formed. We did it.
That's right, yeah.
That was 1980.
You met Pat in 78.
2 years after we met Pat.
And then it's 2 years, Then 80 when you formed the group and did the EP.
Yeah, the band, we did our first gig in March of 1980. And we recorded Girls About Town, 4 songs, 7-inch EP. I think it was late summer, or definitely the summer of 1980 in New York City. And we released it on Halloween of that year. And there was 3 Denizio originals, plus we did a cover of the Beach Boys song Girl Don't Tell Me, which I actually handed a copy to Carl Wilson once in New York. I don't know if he ever played it, but that was one of his signature vocals on a Beach Boy record, a song we really dug and still dig.
Yeah. And then Beauty and Sadness, you did 3 years after that.
Correct. Yeah. Girls About Town, the 7-inch, was a good calling card for us. I guess it helped us get some gigs. We had already been playing around New Jersey, but more importantly, on Bleecker Street in New York City, there was a club called Kenny's Castaways, which closed up a few years ago, but that was our home base in New York. Pretty well-known club. It really wasn't a bona fide rock and roll club. It was more of a place where singer-songwriters were performing. Steve Forbert got his start there, and kind of a quote-unquote folky scene, but a cool scene, and a lot of industry people hung out there. So we made some good contacts, and Pat Kenny, the owner, was kind of our spiritual godfather in New York City. He gave us a lot of breaks and encouragement. Anyway, so Girls About Town actually got us out of the tri-state area. We played some gigs in Ohio and Connecticut, but when we did Beauty and Sadness, we recorded it we cut that track right around Halloween of 82. Halloween keeps coming up. It's our favorite. For some of us, I know for Pat and myself, it's our favorite holiday, favorite time of year. But anyway, we cut the title track, I think the night before Halloween of 82 at the record plant. We started working at the record plant, which was a legendary New York studio. So many incredible artists and artists worked there, and records were cut there, including John Lennon, Bruce Springsteen, Mountain, the Raspberries. I think George Harrison mixed the Bangladesh concert there. On and on and on. It was a major studio on West 44th Street. So we were really happy to be working at a world-class facility. And we cut the title track. It was produced by a guy called Alan Betrock, who was pretty well known on the New York scene, not just as a producer. He did produce early DBs and Blondie tracks. And he was also a journalist and had some publications like the Rock Marketplace. And he founded the New York Rocker, a very famous and well-respected um, music journal that came about during the punk era. Anyway, he produced the entire EP. We did the other tracks in early '83, released it that summer, I believe, and it got a review in Rolling Stone. I think it was 3.5 stars, which was not too shabby for us, and that helped us a bit. I mean, we didn't fit into any of the trends that were happening at the time. And there was we liked rockabilly, but we didn't go that route where there was a bunch of kind of rootsy rockabilly bands. We played some rockabilly tinged music, but we didn't really rally around it. And we did have a punk attitude, but we didn't wear it on our sleeves. Anyway, it was hard for us to get. We had a fan base, but it was hard for us to get a lot of respect and a lot of gigs, and to have the industry pay much attention to us. I don't know. We just weren't fashionable. I think we didn't try to be. We were. Any success we ever had was on our own terms and in spite of ourselves in some ways, Anyway, so one of the greatest things about that happened as a result of releasing Beauty and Sadness is that we got that review in Rolling Stone, but also we were able to travel overseas for the first time as a band. And we did a tour of Scandinavia. It was a government sponsored program in Sweden. We played Sweden, Norway, and Finland. And that was really an eye-opener for us and an awful lot of fun. So we came back home. That was in '84. And we came back home after that, and we couldn't get arrested, really. And Pat was starting to write some great songs. By spring of '85, we cut 5 of those. And it was back at the record plant. We had a session booked. I remember it was Good Friday of 1985. And we were accustomed to working on the ground floor where the A and B rooms, the big rooms, were at the record plant. But they were kind of sneaking us in and giving us real budget rates, And so if somebody came in and had a real budget, we had to get either postponed or kicked upstairs to the smaller room. So we got a phone call that day. So I'm sorry, we can't work at Studio A. Because whoever it was coming in and they were paying real money. So that they said we can go on with the session, but we have to go upstairs to the studio. I think it was C or D, which was a much smaller room. And we kind of paused for a second, but we decided to go on with the session. And luckily we did, because that night we cut 5 tracks, and these became the actual basic tracks that ended up on Especially for You. And that we cut Cigarette, Crazy Mixed Up Kid, Alone at Midnight, Behind the Wall of Sleep, and Blood and Roses, all in one session that night. Wow. We later, of course, sweetened them and did overdubs and changed some of the parts, but those were the basics that we cut that night. And we used those basics to shop around for. This was self-financed, so we used those tracks to shop around to try and get a deal with every independent label. Was just turning us down until Enigma Records reacted and gave us a chance. And we signed a deal with them, and they gave us a budget for our first album and put us together with Don Dixon. And we finished the album at the record plant in December of '85. And it came out. Well, there's a whole series of events that happened in '86. The album was completely wrapped up and in the can in January of '86. I forget why they sat on it so long before releasing it, but Enigma was doing soundtracks for Canon films, which was a film company that made a lot of B movies and C and D movies, a lot of exploitation films, and they did the Death Wish series. Anyway, they were working on this one piece called Dangerously Close. It was a like a vigilante movie, exploitation type thing, and it wasn't very good. But what happened was, it's funny how things do happen sometimes. There was an advanced cassette of Especially for You in the car of, I think, one of the attorneys for Canon Films or one of the head honchos. And one day, that guy's wife gets into the car, puts the tape in, she hears Blood and Roses and says to her husband, I think this song will fit in that teenage vigilante movie you're working on. So Enigma called us. They flew us out to LA and we shot a video for Blood and Roses. The album wasn't even out yet. And initially we did this performance piece for Blood and Roses with a little bit of actual interaction between us and one of the actors in the film. And they intercut scenes from Dangerously Close into this video, and it started getting airplay on MTV, and people were calling in about it. And a 12-inch of the single was released to radio, but not commercially, just promo, and it just started taking hold on album rock radio and MTV of all things. The song just clicked with people to the point where they edited out the scenes from the film, and it became just a performance piece, and it really put us on the map. And that was spring or early summer of '86, springtime, and the LP finally came out around July 4th. We were just embarking on our first national tour, and we did a few dates opening for the Ramones. That was a big thrill. That's the long answer to your question, but that leads us to Especially for You.
Yeah. Well, before we get further into the album, I want to digress for a moment, because it was in the years leading up to that, between the second EP and Especially, that you guys backed Otis Blackwell some.
Yes, that's
How
right.
did you end up getting that gig, and what was that like working with him?
Well, that harkens back to Kenny's Castaways, the club I mentioned before. There was a really wonderful piano player named Andy Rosen who played with a few bands there. That's the other thing about Kenny's Castaways. It was a great place to meet other musicians that were doing these gigs with these different bands and singer-songwriters. Really opened up our world to that end of the business. Anyway, Andy Rosen was playing piano with Otis and the band he had at the time. And it so happened that Otis was looking for a new band, and Andy recognized our interest in what they called roots music or old rock and roll, and thought that we would be a good fit. So he brought us together with Otis. It was that simple. We did one rehearsal, and then we embarked on numerous gigs playing with Otis up and down the Eastern Seaboard mostly. I don't think we went out of we played DC, Boston, New York, New Jersey, Philadelphia, that type of thing. But we had a ball playing with him, and we learned a lot from him. I can't even say specifically what we learned. It's just about longevity and stick-to-itiveness, I'd say, and relishing in some of his war stories. And, well, I remember one thing, we were at a rehearsal just before we went to Scandinavia, and he said, fellas, before you get on that plane, make sure you have a return ticket in your hand. I've heard of a lot of cats going over there and they get stranded. Make sure you have a return ticket. So he imparted some wisdom to us. He had been through it all. He made and lost fortunes numerous times by his own doing. He made a lot of money, and he gambled it away or spent it foolishly, but he was still pretty well grounded and a down-to-earth, beautiful guy. And I really miss Otis. I think about him a lot. And we played some really and he appreciated what we brought. You know, Andy played piano with us, but we had that really kind of gutsy approach to old rock and roll at the time. We were really listening to a lot of Eddie Cochran and Chuck Berry and Buddy Holly, of course, and Elvis. So we were really primed for that gig. We were the right tool for the job.
It had to be really cool to be there playing with somebody whose catalog is just as amazing as his.
Yeah, I mean, if there's people out there who don't know who we're talking about, Otis Blackwell was a seminal rock and roll R&B writer. He wrote a lot of hits for Elvis Presley, Jerry Lee Lewis. He wrote Return to Sender, All Shook Up, Don't Be Cruel. He wrote Fever. He wrote Paralyzed, Great Balls of Fire, um, Breathless, Handyman. He wrote Handyman. And a number of other record cuts that maybe aren't quite as well recognized, some B-sides and other film numbers for Elvis. But he made a lot. He wrote a lot of records. He wrote a lot of songs and made a lot of records on his own. He was a cool dude, and I do think about him a lot. Yeah, glad you brought that up.
Yeah. Well, yeah, having known that you guys did that, that was one of the things that piqued my interest. Yeah, because he's one of those guys that's just got, I don't think enough people realize how important Otis is.
Yeah, no, it's true, and that also brings to mind he was very good friends with Doc Pomus, who was another New York rock and roll and R&B writer. He wrote "Save the Last Dance" for me, a number of things for the Drifters, and for Elvis. He wrote "Surrender," "A Mess of Blues," a number of things. Big hits are escaping me right now, and things for the coasters like. Did he write "Youngblood," or was that Lieber and Stoller? But anyway, Doc Pomus hung around Kenny's Castaways and the Lone Star and the Bottom Line in New York, and he was our friend. It was so cool to be able to know these people who were so important to rock and roll, and to have them as our friends and people that we could hang out with was so meaningful to us, and just being in their aura couldn't help but rub off on us. The greatness. It was really. We were really blessed. Doc was a cool guy. I went to one of his birthday parties once at his apartment in New York City, and I walked in, and this is before we had known Otis. I walk in, and place is packed, and there's a little PA there, and Big Joe Turner is sitting there singing. I look over here, Otis Blackwell's at the piano. Mike Stoller is in the corner over there. It's like somebody else too. I forget. I felt like I died and went to R&B heaven. And Doc was just the coolest dude. He's such a sweet, cool guy. His bio is highly recommended. It's called Lonely Avenue. Yeah, he wrote that song for Ray Charles, Lonely Avenue. But what a great read, and what a Damon Runyon-esque existence he had for a while in New York City when he lived in this one hotel. He actually lived in this place and spent a lot of time in the lobby with all these New York characters. Anyway, that was another great perk of hanging around Kenny's in New York at the time. And yeah. So, yeah.
Well, Jay, getting back to especially for you.
All right.
How did you guys end up getting Don Dixon to produce that?
That was a suggestion from Enigma. By that time, he had already. I'm going to switch my ringer off on my phone just in case. By that time, he had already produced or co-produced REM early albums and worked with a lot of folks that were, back then they called it college radio. Started out on the college radio scene. He was very well respected, but I hadn't heard of him. I don't know if any of us really did at that point. So it was a real fortuitous pairing. thanks to Enigma, because we're still friends with him to this day, and we did a number of records with him, and he's a great guy, and we learned a lot. Excuse me, we learned a lot from Don, and we worked very efficiently and very quickly with Don too, I must say. So yeah, there was this fellow Scott Vanderbilt who was the A&R person at Enigma. One of the reasons he signed us or recognized us is because he knew of us because he was a college DJ and he had known Girls About Town and Beauty and Sadness. So I guess that helped rise us out of the pile of demos he was recording. Plus, I always jokingly, or maybe not jokingly, say is we're wise enough to not include a photo in the press kit. So
Yeah.
so that
Well, tell me this. Suzanne Vega sings
Yeah.
on there. I had read that she and Pat actually, before you guys landed the deal, had worked together in an office, and that's how they met. Is that true?
Yeah, it is true. I guess we're talking 83, 84, 85. And yeah, it was in some office capacity. And she was his boss and was tasked with cutting him loose, with firing him from the job. So, and we knew her from the scene, the clubs, and she was around, and had a lot of respect for her. But also, I think she felt like she owed Pat one, and so she agreed to do the harmony vocal on "In a Lonely Place," and I mean, she was already, I guess, a star, but not as big as she would become. I think I forget the chronology of things, but she did a great job, and it was nice of her to do that. And it's nice to have that as a lasting recording.
Yeah. Tell me this: of the tracks on that album, what are the ones that stood out for you when you were in the studio?
Well, I always do cite, even though it might seem too obvious, Behind the Wall of Sleep and Blood and Roses from that fateful night, Good Friday, 1985, at the record plant. We had rehearsed those songs and played them live, I think, a few times. But I did feel like we cut some pretty cool tracks with those. Um, and then when we did finish them, they turned out really special, I think, really good. Uh, I just think there's some magic, if you will, in those particular tracks that we just, as the four guys that we're like soul brothers, we just grew up together, and Pat just instantly became into our fold and we into his fold. And we had a real collective groove. And I just think we came together spiritually that night, especially on those tracks. Not knowingly, it just was inherent, and I really, especially for you, those are the ones that stand out. Trying to think what the other tunes. I like Alone at Midnight quite a bit. They were all fun to track. We did it really quickly, really quickly. We had those 5 songs already done. We finished them with Don, and then we cut the remaining 7, I think, in 1 or 2 days, the basics. And then we also cut some bonus tracks. Jimmy's song White Castle Blues that he wrote with our high school pal, Bob Banta, and an instrumental, Dick Dale instrumental called Mr. Eliminator. So, and maybe 1 or 2 other things. So we worked really quickly and efficiently. We were we were ready, I guess you would say.
Yeah. Well, the follow up, Green Thoughts. You did that one in like 16 days, I'd read.
That's pretty accurate. So we hit the road for that first tour in late June of '86, after Especially for You. And that tour lasted from June or July of '86 through late August or early September of '87. It was a long, long tour. Of course, we were home here and there. So it wasn't like we were out 15, 16 months with no semblance of a break. And we went to Europe for the first time, which was really, not first time, but of all of Europe for the most part, first major European tour. That was very exciting. So what's the saying? You have all your career prior to your first album to make that first album, and then you have a year or so to come up with material for your second album. Well, we rose to the occasion, and we like I said, we got off the road. I think it was the very end of summer of '87, and by early first week of December, we were in the studio working on Green Thoughts at Capitol Tower in Hollywood, which was a big thrill. We were able to get onto Capitol through a loophole in our contract somehow. So we signed with Capitol, and again, went with Dixon and our engineer, Jim Ball, who we brought from the record plant, and went to task. I think we cut all the basics in 2 days, and we just had that work ethic. We still do. If there's a job to be done, do it, get it done, and then have fun in the process, but do the best you can as quickly as you can. And I guess we always say that we're from Jersey and we had a real blue collar work ethic. It's true. Our dads worked either in factories, or Jimmy's father had taverns that he owned and ran, and hardworking men, and I mean, people might say, you're a musician, how hard is that? Well, try it.
I was just going to say, they obviously haven't done it.
Yeah, try it. I mean, it's not like going loading trucks or anything like that, but there's a lot of mental concentration. There's a lot of travel. There's a lot of work, and a lot of work that goes into it. It's different kind, but anyway, I think that's where we got it from. I think we inherited it from generations of hardworking families in New Jersey,
Yeah. Now tell me this: how did you guys get Del Shannon to join in?
Oh yeah, Del Shannon, best known for his song "Runaway," but he had a lot of other incredible records. One of my biggest heroes ever growing up. Hats off to Larry. "Stranger in Town," "Keep Searching," his version of "Handyman," and the record "Home and Away" that he made with Andrew Loog Oldham, and so many other great cuts. I was just enamored with him, and I thought, how great would it be if we could someday meet him and maybe play with him, do a tour or record with him. So at the time, my now wife, then girlfriend, was working at a club called the Bottom Line in New York, pretty famous club. And she asked her boss for a contact on Del, because he knew everybody in the business. So we did have at that time a pre-release of Especially for You. So I sent Del a cassette of Especially for You. I got his address, and he called me back. Whoa, Del Shannon is actually calling me. And he was coming to New York to play a show at the Felt Forum. Went to see the show and meet him. We stayed in touch. And I think that was '86. And so we stayed in touch. And when we hit LA, I called him. I said, Del, we're at the Capitol Tower. If you feel like coming down, maybe sing a little bit. And he did. It was just that easy. And then he also would come when we played in LA, and we'd do encores with him. We'd play Runaway with him and maybe one or two other songs. And he was a friend. And I was shocked when he killed himself. It was heartbreaking. I hate thinking about it now. But I got to spend a little time with him. And Jimmy and I he asked Jimmy Badrick and I, to sing backups on one of his sessions, those are pinch me moments, you know. That was in '88, and those remained in the can until a couple of years ago. His last album was called Rock On, which is not a bad album. There's some really good songs on there. The reissue of that album contained one of the tracks, as a bonus track, one of the songs that Jimmy and I sang on. It was his version of Ralph Donner's You Don't Know What You've Got Until You Lose It. And so that's out there with Jimmy and I singing on it. And also the box set came out a year or two ago, and it's on there as well. So, yeah, that was a wonderful moment for us and for Del. I think he had a really good time doing it. And I think it was, he had already done the album with Tom Petty producing. That was in '82. But I remember when he was in the studio with us, he was hearing the guitars and the rockin' element of what we were doing, and it seemed to fire him up a little bit. And I think it got him inspired to go back into the studio and do more stuff. So, yeah, that's how that happened.
That's great.
Yeah, that was really, really cool. He's just one of those artists that it wasn't a soul singer, but he had a lot of soul. Yeah, a real soulful quality about what he did, and a complete original in my book. And just, I think a phrase was coined about him that he sang with a teardrop in his voice. You know, just had that the quality that I admire so much, and I still get a special feeling when I listen to him. You know.
Well, for me, the thing with Del is whether you listen to the pop rock songs that most people know him for, or the country stuff that he did. Yeah, in the '60s, he had a lot of a couple of them were straight country, but no matter what he did, it rang true.
Exactly.
And the emotion that he carried in that voice and his dedication to the music comes through no matter what genre he's singing, while simultaneously being Del.
That's right. That's a good way to put it. And you're right about the country, his country stuff. He did I think it was in '65 or '66, an entire album of Hank Williams songs.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the fact that his label, that was his passion, that was his hero, was Hank Williams. And he did a real credible job on those cuts. And it wasn't like he was imitating him, but he just did his take on him, his interpretation of it. And it bears repeated listening. It's a good album. Yeah, you're right. He just rang true no matter what he did. He was always Del. Yeah, God, I love Del Shannon. Words can't say.
On a radio show that I did, we did a segment where it was a contest. Guess who this is? And we did. I'm So Lonesome I Could Cry.
Okay.
From the Hank Williams albums you talked about. This would be a song that everybody would know, but nobody could guess who it was for the longest time.
Is that right?
And finally, somebody said, I'm not sure, but I think that sounds like Del. It's like, you are correct. People were just mystified because they had no idea that he'd recorded it.
Yeah. Isn't that something? I'm glad he did that album. It's just, and then, he did some other country singles. I think it was in the late '70s or '80s for Warner Brothers, strictly country stuff. And they're good. They're pretty good records. So, his heart was certainly in that direction as well as the rock and roll field, Hank Williams and country music was inspirational to a lot of people in rock and roll, and a lot of songwriters. So it's nice when that tribute is paid in the right way. Yeah,
exactly. Now you mentioned about recording at Capitol Records. Now going into there, knowing all the history, in that building, those studios. What was that like when you're walking in? And I'm sure there's probably a lot of records that were really important to you were cut there. So you go in to play your songs. What was that like?
It's funny. It was incredible. The feeling was incredible to go in there and hang there. It really was. But I always say this when you're actually when the red light goes on and you're recording, or you're doing a gig with, say, one of your heroes, sitting in on a song or two, it's a special feeling. But at the same time, your mind is focused on, I got to get this. I got to get this job done. I gotta make sure I cut a good track, or I don't screw up this live performance. Like I got to sit in with Brian Wilson once, which was really huge for me. Brian's probably my ultimate hero, and I'm up there and I'm looking at him, but I'm also thinking I've never played with him before, uh, but I want to make sure I don't mess up. So my mind is really on just doing my best. What it was for us, I think, is when we had some free time in the tower, which we did. That was so cool because we did get to hang out in the other studios, and we were very fortunate that our assistant, this guy Vince, had he had keys to every room in the towers, and we worked some late hours, and he just brought us to every room. There's a picture of me somewhere with my feet up on the president's desk with a beer in my hand, at midnight. And he brought us into the famous echo chambers, which are located underneath the parking lot. Big, big stuff for us. Yeah, I mean, Capitol Records. Another pinch me moment, the fact that we were on that label, really special to us. And to be able to hang out in that building when it was still a thriving record company too, and the studios, which I guess are not as busy as they were, or I'm not sure even what the state status of them is at this time. But to be able to be there when it was still a real entity, that was huge for us, just huge.
Yeah, I bet. Well, talking about Capitol, the next album, 11, was on Capitol. And I always say that every album is a snapshot of where an artist or group is at that point in time.
Mm-hmm.
So when you guys did 11, where were things for the Smithereens?
Well, we were so fortunate that our career seemed to have legs, I remember, I often cite this moment too, still on the first tour, after Blood and Roses was starting to run its course, our promotion guy, Rick Winward from Enigma at the time, called us aside. We were at the Roxy Theater in Los Angeles. I think it was late summer of '86. He pulled us aside. He said, after sound check, and he said, I want to tell you guys, our next single was Wall of Sleep, Behind the Wall of Sleep. And he was telling us that it was starting to get ads at radio stations and starting to take off. So it was that moment where I felt, okay, maybe we really do have a shot at a career here. Or not just our first single, but our second single is taking wing. And so then we were fortunate with Green Thoughts that, because you never know from album to album how you're going to do. But it's so important that with your second album that you have success, because that means you can really gain momentum. And we did. I mean, Only a Memory took off. House We Used to Live In, Drown a Man with Tears. We were able to go back to Europe and enjoy radio success and play to great crowds. I always say we could never have done this without our fan base and the people who come out to support us. To this day, we're so fortunate that they're so loyal and supportive. So, yeah, where were we at come 11? I mean, Jimmy was writing, Pat was writing, and we had the goods. Fortunately, that we still were. It all comes down to the songs, and fortunately, the inspiration was there. And Capitol decided, and we decided that we would just try a different producer. Worked with Ed Stasium. We admired his work with the Ramones and so many other groups that he had. And he was another Jersey guy. So we worked, for that album, we worked at American Recorders in Woodland Hills, I think it was, Calabasas, with the team that had worked with Steppenwolf and Three Dog Night and Sandy Nelson, American recorders. They had moved from Hollywood to Calabasas area. But I'm talking about Richie Podolor and Bill Cooper was our engineer. He had worked on all those records. They really knew what they were doing with Ed. And his assistant and co-producer, Paul Hamingson. So, the budget was a little bigger. When you have a bigger budget, you usually use it, and you spend a little more time. It wasn't outrageous, but it wasn't 16 days. It was more like a month and a half, I think. 2 months, maybe. I forget, to make that record. And what was cool is we got to spend time in LA. We would camp out at like an apartment building they got for us, apartments, or in some cases houses. And we got to go out and see bands and do a lot of things in Los Angeles for a big chunk of time. So great memories of making that record. And again, we were so lucky that we had even bigger success with that album. Girl Like You became a real big record. And we had several singles from there too. So, I think, I don't know, we certainly weren't glamour boys, and we just succeeded on the merits of the music and our personalities. I think our audiences identified with us because we're kind of like them. We just did what we did, and we the other thing was, though, our shows were a lot of fun. We like to have fun, and we're fans too, so we know what it's like to go and see bands and project what we thought our fans would like to see. But we were just being ourselves and being, just having our arrested development in front of their eyes, and just the eternal teenagers, I guess you would say. And to this day, at our shows, we really, really like to have fun, and I think that's what draws people, and it makes them have fun. And who wants to go to a show and not have fun, right? So,
I thought 11 captured more of the crunchy guitars in driving rhythm of the live shows.
Could be. Yeah, it was engineered very well, and perhaps it had a bit more punch and crunch, as you say, and people still talk about that album in glowing terms with what you're saying in mind. Yeah. It's a big favorite of a lot of people's, so I'm glad that it seems to stand the test of time for a lot of folks. It was another good tour for us, and we just and it allowed us to keep going on, man, and thankfully.
Yeah. Now, is it true that Girl Like You were supposed to have a different female vocalist on that track?
Yeah, we were being managed by Freddie DeMann at the time, who was also the manager of Madonna, and she was scheduled to come in and sing that refrain at the end with Pat. And the reason we were given that she didn't come in that day is because she was dating Warren Beatty at that moment, and purportedly they had an argument that day. So she reneged, but it turned out okay.
I was going to say, I think it worked out okay in the end.
Yeah, it did.
So, then you worked with Ed again on Blow Up.
We did. Back in Los Angeles. This time we went to A&M Studio on La Brea in Hollywood, which had been the former site of the Charlie Chaplin Studios many years prior. But it was matter of fact, that was a studio of some renown. Everybody had worked there. It was a great, great room. And the big room where we cut the tracks, it occurred to me recently because I saw that documentary about We Are the World. I don't know if you caught that, but that was the room where they did the We Are the World recording and video. Big room. And bigger budget. Spent more time on that album and working with Ed and Paul Hamingson again. And yeah, I thought the album had a lot of variety, some real good songs, but didn't do as well for whatever reason. Some people say because that's when grunge came in and the tide was changing, and could be. I don't know. But
Yeah.
we did a great tour. We went to Australia when that album came out, and yeah, just good memories about it. And then Capitol, even though it sold close to 500,000, they decided to let us go. And at that time, we recorded what became known as the Lost Album, which we issued, I think, about a year or two ago, from sessions that we did in '93 between labels and in New York. People are really digging that record, which is nice to hear. It was sitting on the shelf all these years. I had a DAT tape of it, and thankfully, remember DATs?
Absolutely. I've mixed a lot of stuff down on that.
Yeah. Hopefully, you've transferred them by now to a hard drive because they can be.
Yeah, they're all digital files now.
Good, because sometime you have to play with them to get them to play. You know.
Mm-hmm. And good luck getting the players fixed if they break.
Yeah, there's still a few people out there that know how to fix them, but you're right, it's not as easy as it used to be. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'll tell you, I know we're coming up on our time here, Dennis, and you don't want to shortchange anything, but I also wanted to get into outside the Smithereens. You played with some amazing people, on your own. You played with Nancy Sinatra, Ronnie Spector, Dave Davies. So, tell us what about how you wind up with playing with those folks and some of the things you recall.
Sure. I mean, I have a little more time, so we don't have to have a hard stop in an hour. Well, with Ronnie, a friend of ours, Mark Freed, who used to work at BMI, put together a show in 1990. The Grammys were in New York that year, and he was putting together a show for the BMI post-Grammy party at the Hilton Hotel. And you know who the Vivino brothers are? Their brother was Uncle Floyd, another great New Jersey personality who had a cable TV show we appeared on. And he's one of the greatest entertainers ever, but that's a whole other discussion. His brothers, Jimmy and Jerry, probably most people know them from having played in Conan O'Brien's house band. Jimmy, I think, was the band leader along with Max Weinberg. Anyway, before they were in that band, I had known them from New York, and they were leading this band for this party, post-Grammy party. And the idea was we'd have a core band, and we would back up Steve Cropper, Benny King, Darlene Love, Lloyd Price, and Ronnie Spector, all in one night. Well, I did, I think, 2 or 3 songs each. And so we did, and that was just a magical night. And so I got to play with Ronnie that night. Again, I think it was 90, 91, 92, somewhere around there. But I knew Ronnie's husband, manager, Jonathan Greenfield, because she would play the bottom line a lot, and I was always hanging out there. My wife worked there, and a lot of good shows happened there. So anyway, Jonathan was a real record geek, much like I was, and still am to some degree. So we would always hang out and shoot the breeze on the phone about old favorite records. And so we were good buddies. And he was always trying to get me to play with Ronnie again. And I was on the road doing other things. Finally, whatever year it was, 15 years ago, I was able to make a gig with Ronnie, and it worked out great. So he called me to do a bunch more whenever I was available. And talk about playing with your heroes and playing with music that meant a lot to you. It was not lost on me how much it was like being a kid playing along with my favorite records that I had learned to play, playing with records that Hal Blaine had played on, Be My Baby and Walking in the Rain, and it's just all those incredible records, and Earl Palmer to some degree. It was never lost on me. Every time I went up to the drum kit how special it was, and what a special moment it was for me to be able to play with Ronnie. And up until the end, she was still the real deal. She never like she never was an oldies act. She always maintained vibrancy and a current. Um, she was always doing new things that seemed up to date and not just relegated to the oldies bin. She still sang great, and she still had attitude and exuded a real sweetness on stage. It was really, really a cool thing playing with Ronnie, and I really miss her. I know a lot of people do.
Yeah, well, the every day on music nights on our social media, we do a song of the day. And a while back, we had done Ronnie's take on her track from her Amy Winehouse recordings.
Did she do Back to Black, or what
Back
did she
to Black,
do?
yep.
Yeah, we did that in her live show, and yeah, it was great that Amy acknowledged her, because she did. She acknowledged her, and I also got to play with Mary Weiss from the Shangri-Las,
Mm-hmm.
which was another incredible moment. I never thought that I would, let alone meet her. When I was growing up and loving the Shangri-Las, let alone play with her. And Amy Winehouse was also greatly influenced by Mary, and we just lost Mary last year, and that was horrible. But she was the real deal. She wasn't an oldies act. She was still vital and making great music, and really cared about her show. And I was so happy to have that opportunity to play with her. My goodness. And it's cool because both Ronnie and Mary made it known to me how much they appreciated what I brought to the show, and that had a lot of meaning. You can see some YouTube clips of us, and we did the muscular dystrophy telethon with Mary. That's on YouTube, and I think it's still up. Uh, I did a tour of Spain with Ronnie, and there's one show um, that's up on YouTube. I think the entire show. Anyway, so those were the moments of your life. What was that commercial?
Well, I say, you mentioned Benny King before.
Yeah.
How did you end up co-producing his track?
Our friend Cheryl Pavelski, who had worked at Capitol, she produced our best of record, Blown to Smithereens, and a kind of a rarities, odds and sods collection called Attack of the Smithereens. She now has Omnivore Records, which is an incredible label that releases new and old records. Anyway, she was putting together a Springsteen tribute record, a double disc with all kinds of artists, and the Smithereens did a track on there, a version of Downbound Train. But she called on me to produce a cut with Benny King. And I called up my co-producing friend Dave Amos. We arranged it and brought in 17 players to cut the track with Benny, who lived here in Jersey. And we did a version of 4th of July, Sandy. And it was great because we did the track live like they did in the old days with strings and horns, everybody in the room together. And there was an awful lot of lyrics, but I remember the session working with Benny on the vocal session, and we shoehorned all of Bruce's lyrics into there. He finally nailed it. It was such a great moment when he did. He was truly one of the sweetest men you could hope to meet or work with. Benny was just a prince. So that's how that happened, thankfully, and was able to call him a friend. I worked with him a couple other times too. So anybody that ever knew Benny has the same thing to say. He was just a gem, really a beautiful cat.
Yeah, it's always nice when you get to meet people who you were a big influence on you, who you looked up to, and they're as nice as you hope that they could, would be.
Yeah, it is, because there's been other times when it didn't work out quite that way, but it is nice. And then you realize we're all in this business. We're all just trying to make it work, keep it going. Everybody, unless you're a mega star and you're on a different plane and you're in an isolated environment and world, it's a different story, perhaps. But yeah, it is. It's really cool to be able to do that, and I never lose sight of the fact of how cool it is and how special it is. Yeah, to be able to do that.
Absolutely. Tell me this, Dennis. Do you got time to cover a couple more records?
Sure.
Or
Yes, I do. Yes.
all right. I'll tell you what. We left off just before Date with the Smithereens.
Yeah.
Now,
So,
I'd read that Butch Vig was going to be involved in that to begin with, and then you end up working with Don Dixon again.
yeah, that's right. We were talking with Butch, and he was on board. There was a regime change at Capitol, and that was part of the reason we got dropped too. That happens an awful lot in the business when new president comes in and new staff comes in, and things just shift completely. We actually did do a Christmas song with Butch for Capitol before all that went down. We did a version of Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. I think it turned up on some compilation, but at the time it was just promotional single. You still hear it Christmas time in grocery stores occasionally and here and there. It's a pretty cool version. But yeah, we ended up going back with Don for a date with the Smithereens, and Lou Giordano also was kind of engineer slash co-producer on that. Although the other engineer was John Agnello, great engineer. We cut that at the Magic Shop in New York City. And I think that's one of our grittiest albums. I think that has a real New York feel to it. And yeah, Magic Shop downtown on Crosby Street. Great memories. We cut a lot of that live as a band too. And we had Lou Reed guesting on there. He played on 2 tracks, which we had done a tour with him in '86. So, and Pat knew him. So he was happy to do it. And it was a big thrill for us.
Yeah, I was going to ask you how that came about. So that's a pretty cool partner in recording.
Yeah, and as the years go by, those kind of things, when people pass, or as you get a different perspective on things, the wine gets gets richer. The story, the feelings, the emotions attached to it take on. There are places I remember. All my life. Yeah, you just get a different perspective and maybe nostalgic, perhaps, about certain things, but also grateful that we had these moments.
Right. Exactly. Well, and yeah, gratefulness is an important thing.
I think it is too. I really do think it is. Yeah. You can't. I just think you have to. What goes around comes around. And you have to maintain that feeling, and that it just informs your spirit to be thankful.
Well, one of my things is, I think one of the saddest things is when people become jaded. Yeah, where things that you should get excited about, I know people are just kind of like, yeah, okay, whatever. Yeah. And that youthful enthusiasm and appreciation for something seems to diminish in some folks, and that's one of the things that for me is like, I just can't do that.
Well, it's true. I mean, here's the thing that comes to play as the years go by. I mean, travel gets a little more tiresome, and that could maybe make people feel that way to some degree, or not as excited about doing things. But it's Jimmy often says this, Jimmy Babjack, and it's really true. Even if we had a rough travel day or not feeling that great, when we hit the stage, we really feel like we're 17. We really do, and we play that way. We play like I think we've gotten better since we're 17. but we still have that same spirit and attitude that we do. It's really true. So that's another thing we're grateful for, that we're able to, as long as we're still able to do that, we're going to keep on doing it. And as long as people want to come out and see us and hear us, there's no reason not to do it.
Yeah.
And the notion of, well, I've been thinking of this for years. The notion of retirement is completely abstract, because as long as we're able to do what we do, there's no meaning to the word retirement. We're always going to play. We're always going to write and record. It's what we do. It's not like we are loading trucks. We're making ourselves happy, and we're making people happy, and that's really key. Because, like I said before, we can't do this without our audience, but we're bringing joy to their lives. And I know it because I know it as a fan myself of going to see music that I love. It just takes me away from my problems for a couple hours, right? I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. And it just, music and art and the conveyance of somebody's spirit to another person is just takes you to a plane that you can't normally get to otherwise. And that's a real gift to be able to share that and produce that and have that in your life and give it to somebody else. It's just something we don't take lightly,
Yeah. Well, speaking of which, you guys have got upcoming dates that folks can see at the website, which we have scrolling across the screen.
Mm-hmm.
So, about how many days a year are you guys? How many shows are you guys doing a year now, roughly?
I don't know. I go back and look at my calendar. I don't know. I'm not good with numbers. 20, 30, 40, 50.
All right.
I don't know. Somewhere around there. I think it's more than 20. Math has never been my strong suit,
Yours and mine both.
Yeah. And, we're also really, it was such a shock to our system when we lost Pat in 2017. But we're so lucky that we have other singers that could step in and not by any stretch imitate or try to be a sound-alike or a replacement for Pat, because that can never happen. But they are interpreters of our songs and have a real feel for what we do. Like Marshall Crenshaw, we've known him. He plays on our first album, actually. He's a guest guitarist and keyboard player. He plays six-string bass, and he plays some keyboard on. He plays keyboard on Strangers When We Meet, and we knew him too since the early '80s. The fella Alan Betrock, who produced Beauty and Sadness, produced early Marshall recordings. So right after Pat passed, before Pat passed, we had a gig on the books for January of 18. Pat passed in December of 17. We had a date booked at the Count Basie Theater in Red Bank, New Jersey. And it was a special event being promoted and produced by little Stephen Van Zandt. And when Pat left us, Steve said, let's keep the date. You guys will play, and we'll bring in a bunch of guest vocalists, and we'll make it a tribute to Pat. And we did that. And it was one of the most incredible nights of our career. There was so much love in the room and people coming out to show their love and support for us. And it was that night, Marshall was one of the guests, and Robin Wilson of Gin Blossoms was another guest. And it turned out that Robin, unbeknownst to us, was a huge fan of ours and offered his services that night. And it felt right with him, and it really felt right with Marshall. So it was lucky for us that they were on board for moving forward. And more recently, John Cowsill has done a show with us, and will be doing some more shows with us coming up. He of the famous Cowsills drummer of the Cowsills, who had a bunch of great hit records in the 60s and who also sang on our Blow Up album. So anyway, it'll be 45 years come March of 25, if you can believe that. That's a good number, 45. It's hard to believe it, but time marches on, and so do we. And we just, we're still having fun, so there's no real reason to give it up. You know?
Absolutely. I'll tell you what, Dennis, obviously we couldn't get to every thing, Smithereens, but hopefully we've crammed as much into our time as we could. Is there anything that we didn't get to that you want to make sure that we do before we bring this thing to a close?
Jimmy and I are working on new material for a new album, and that will be out in 25. That's exciting to us. And there's a lot of archival releases that will see light of day as soon as I can get to them. We have a lot of things in the vault. As I mentioned before, we put out what was called the Lost Album, but we have a number of things that could fill some volumes that we'd like to release. So we're working on new material. We have more recordings from our archives that will be seeing light of day. So, and we have a bunch of gigs that are starting to be booked for 25. So I do hope that we come to your town and everybody's town. We do love coming out. Everywhere we play, we still have our fans come out to see us. And it's, we played recently in Sellersville, Pennsylvania, a really cool theater. It's called the Sellersville Theater. And this happens a lot. Well, the people after the show, we always go and say hi to our fans after the show. And there was a couple that drove to Pennsylvania from Georgia to see us. And sometime I forget where we were. They'll come from Florida they'll plan their vacations around our shows if we're not heading to their neck of the woods in that particular year or whatever. And that's just incredible that we have that much meaning for people. And maybe this is a way to close it. I don't know, but sometimes you don't realize how you're reaching people. But one time, maybe 10 years ago, we were checking out of a hotel in New Hampshire, and the woman behind the desk said, "Oh, you're with the Smithereens, and I wish I could have made your show last night, but I had to work. But a friend of mine was a big fan of yours, and unfortunately, she passed away. But man, she was as a matter of fact, she had the lyrics to In a Lonely Place engraved on her tombstone." And that was kind of it for me. I thought that really is, that says it all. When your music can really touch somebody that deeply, it's cool. Yeah, it's a beautiful thing.
Absolutely, and that is the perfect way to wrap this one up, Dennis.
Yeah, thanks to everybody, really, to everybody for 45 years of love and support and continued support. So we do hope to see you soon, later this year. I know we're going to Arizona, we're going to Buffalo, we're going to Colorado, New England, and Carteret, New Jersey, our hometown, on early December. So, and then next year we're going to be all over the place. So thanks again, and we hope to see everybody out there. And thanks to you, Michael. Thanks for having me on today.
No, well, thanks for taking the time to join us, Dennis.
Yeah, pleasure.
I'll tell you what, throughout the show, we've had your social media and your website and all that stuff posted so that folks can track down where you're going to be performing and get access all your catalog. So again, thanks for being here, everybody. Thanks for watching. Have a good night.
Bye-bye.
This has been Music Night at the Majestic with Michael Boswell. If you enjoyed this edition of Music Night at the Majestic, follow us on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, and at musicnight.net. Music Night at the Majestic is a copyright production of Starliner Media. Any use of the accounts and descriptions of this program, its audio or visual content, without the express written consent of Starliner Media is prohibited. Thank you for joining us this evening. We'll see you next time for Music Night at the Majestic. This is your announcer speaking. Starliner Media.